I don't think this is about crude oil, narco-terrorism, Tren de Agua, or the Cartel of the Suns, Tom. This is about China. This is about geopolitics. This is about China buying discounted barrels from Venezuela in RMB, which they've been doing for however many years. And if you notice, just this morning, Beijing called in all the Chinese banks saying we need to review your credit exposure to Venezuela because this is not going, it's going south in a hurry. So I think this is about signaling. I think this is, but look, in the same breath, this gives all the fuel you need to the dollar bears here because people are going to draw parallels between Ukraine, between Taiwan. This gives a green light for China to kind of move in on, you saw all the stuff online over the weekend with people heated, talking about, this is the green light for us to invade Frog Island, which is a derogatory way of referring to Taiwan. But look, I mean, the interesting thing for me this time around is you don't hear anything about Edmundo Gonzalez, the former ambassador to Argentina who ran for president, Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize winning, Venezuelan, or Juan Guaido. I mean, this is about, keeping the existing regime in place. And again, it's a sort of a novel concept. I haven't really given it much thought. I haven't really seen anything like this before.
So the big take story on the Bloomberg terminal today, Trump's ousting of Maduro shows his new world order is here. What does an EM investor take from that? Is that a net positive, a net negative, just uncertainty? I don't know.
Well, I think in the near term, you have to kind of look at what this means for, again, the dollar, right? And I think it does give fuel to the dollar declining, which is inherently good for emerging markets. And no region has higher yields than Latin America. So you saw Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia all coming out against the recent actions, yet they're the three highest yielding economies in emerging markets. And, I do believe that if you're a trader or an investor and you have to kind of remain an unbiased, unfiltered opinion, you're probably going to look to those economies for carry. So I actually am pretty constructive on those markets here in the early going. But, you're right. What does this mean for, think about it, Brazil, Guyana, the cost to develop their offshore drilling is, roughly 75. It's much more expensive than going into Venezuela. So I don't care about all the $100 billion it's going to cost to get, Venezuelan barrels back online. It's still 25% cheaper than, doing offshore in Guyana and Brazil. So that might fundamentally be weaker for Petrobras and Ecopet and some of those.
Let me ask for our listeners and viewers, who writes a check for those hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 5 years?
Tom, $100 billion in Venezuela oil revenue was stolen by government officials from 1972 to 1997, that 25-year period. $100 billion is sitting offshore somewhere, Credit Suisse knows. And, I'm not suggesting that I'm absolutely serious about this, Tom. This is nothing new. There is a lot of stolen oil wealth that is sitting offshore. Now, I'm not at all suggesting that the U.S. is going to go after that next. But, this is really what we're after. And there's a huge the 8 million migrants, many of whom are located here in the U.S. The Venezuelan diaspora is cheering this on. And I do believe that, look, regardless of how Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, look at this over the next few months, Colombia's got a big election coming up in May. Brazil's got a big election coming up at the end of this year. The pivot to the right is on, and so I gotta believe, you're going to see the biggest contests to the current administrations coming from pro-U.S., what's going on in Venezuela parties, and that's what we're going to get a ruling on here.
Paul, jump in here, but can I ask, have you been to Caracas? I mean, you look like Brad Pitt.
I was in Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro over the break. So I was boots on the ground in Brazil. I was boots on the ground in Argentina. Constructive, bullish. Those economies seem to be bouncing pretty nicely here. And I could tell you some stories about what I really witnessed offline, but I don't think our audience is ready for it.
So, what is the feeling as you talk to your clients today, next couple of days? Are they going to be more bullish on LATAM or less so, or taking a wait and see?
Well, I think, you want to see where these Veni bonds come in. People are calling for 60 cents on the dollar. I mean, these bonds in early 2023 were trading at pennies on the dollar. I'm talking 5 cents on the dollar. They're at 40, 45 cents now, and growing. So, you've had some really big gains along the lines. But look, if you're investing in the future of Venezuela, you're a long-term investor, you're going to want, if you're a current creditor who's in default holding these bonds, you're going to want to see, a restructuring that links your interest to the equity upside that Venezuela offers, because this is a resource-rich country with mining interests, rare earths, they've got oil coming out. We all know the numbers. So, tourism, coastline, the whole smash. So, GDP warrants, structures like that, I think are going to find their way into the vocabulary of a lot of creditors.
One more question, as we're going to turn to Damian Sassower, Bloomberg Business Sports. How do the major banks get involved? Does the president dial 1-800 Moynihan, 1-800 Diamond? What do you see as a process out of the 90s where we all go Bill Rhodes LatAm.
No, I don't know if it's going to be that quick or that. I don't think. Look, I think you need to restructure $60 billion worth of bonds before anything happens. And by the way, Venezuela's borrowed a lot of money from China now since 2017, and Russia. They owe a lot of money to the Iranians. So there's a lot of other, kind of liens on those assets that it's going to be very complicated. And so, for me, I want to see how that kind of all materializes, what the talks talk about. But first, it's about an election. It's about, regime change, if there is such a thing there, because right now it doesn't look like it. So again, we're in uncharted waters here.